Hi, my name is Christa Sadler and I live in Flagstaff. I am a river guide in the Grand Canyon, and it is the best thing in the world. I love that place more than any place in the world. Um, I have worked there for 35 years now, which I think is kind of crazy because it doesn't feel like that long. I'm also a geologist and a paleontologist and um, just generally a student of the world. I really love learning about natural history, human history, and that's one of the reasons I love Grand Canyon so much. It is absolutely like just the world's best classroom, and I'm always learning something while I'm there. Yes, the canyon and the river are always teaching me something. I'm also an author, and I am going to read you a story that was published in a journal. This journal, which no longer exists, but it turned into something else. It's the Journal of the Museum of Northern Arizona, and it actually was published a long time ago, but I kind of thought it would be a good story to read because it talks about my first time on the river. And I know a lot of you guys either have been on the river a couple times or maybe not at all. And that is the other thing I wanted to say, is that this has been a really weird year, hasn't it? It's been a very strange and scary year, and very sad for me, and I know for a lot of you guys, because I have not been able to get on the river at all. All my trips canceled, and I miss the rivers so much. So what I did, and the reason I'm sitting here, is that I decided to bring the river to me. I painted my garage like the river. If I can't get on the river, I'm going to bring it here. And I like being outside anyway, so I thought you guys could at least sort of see the river. So we've got the green of the Colorado when it's clear, the brown of the Colorado and the Little Colorado when they're running muddy, and then the blue, the clear blue of the Little Colorado. So anyway, this is my river. Welcome to my river, and thanks for coming, and I really hope you enjoy this story, and I hope you get on the river really soon. Thanks. So the story that I would like to read to you guys today is a story that I wrote, gosh, almost 30 years ago, maybe 25, 28 years ago, and it's called No Turning Back, and it's the story of kind of my first time on the river as a passenger, just discovering the river, and then I juxtapose that with the story of my first time rowing my own boat down the river, which was amazing and terrifying and incredible. And obviously not too terrifying because I'm still there. But anyway, so it's called No Turning Back. A boatman reminisces about what first drew her to the Colorado River. The roar grew louder. It sounded like a jet plane about to leave the runway. As we rounded the corner, I could tell where the roar was coming from, but I couldn't see a thing. The river dropped off in a straight horizon. The rapids I knew on the rivers of Oregon and Northern California fell away in nice, long ramps of white water, and they sounded more like applause. But this rapid had a deep growl to it, a basso born of more rushing water than any 5 of the rivers I knew combined. Both my guidebook and the trainer in my boat said this was Badger Rapid, mile 8 on the Colorado River through Grand Canyon. Just follow the boats in front of you, Dave explained calmly. It's fun. I suppose if he had known my real level of experience, he might not have been so calm. This was the first time I rowed my own boat down the Colorado River in June of 1988. At times, I couldn't even imagine surviving that trip, much less wanting to come back to do it over and over again, every summer, every year, until I could no longer hold a pair of oars. But Dave was right. It is fun, and so much more. In June of 1985, I had traveled as a commercial passenger on a motor rig. For 6 glorious days on very high water, we had rarely used the motor. We simply floated and watched. Was like a kid in a candy store. I had just begun to study geology and was acting as the, quote, trip geologist for a group of friends. Hour by hour, we sat on the front of the boat and examined our geology guides and then compared what we were reading to what we were seeing. I was in heaven. And about day 4, I remember somebody saying to me, "Hey, Christa, you look like you belong here." Whoever that was, bless his heart, was right. Although 3 years later, listening to that awful roar at the top of Badger Rapid, I wasn't so sure. "I don't think I should do this, Dave. Maybe you should take the oars." "Ah, bull, just follow the other boats." After an interminable slowness at the top of the rapid, the current was finally speeding up. There was no turning back. It was a feeling I would always remember, and one that returns every single time I run a rapid. As we dropped over the edge, we faced an absolute chaos of whitewater. I'd learned to head the boat straight into the waves, but how could I do that when waves appeared on all sides at once? I developed tunnel vision. There was no world but the one right in front of my boat. Both oars were ripped out of my hands, and I slid halfway off my seat as a wave slapped me in the face. I couldn't pick out any features of the rapid. It was sheer confusion. When I noticed the waves getting smaller and more regular, I scrambled for the oars. The boat was full of water and heavy as a cement truck as we wallowed out into the calm pool at the base of the rapid. We were through, although I was pretty sure I had nothing to do with it. Dave was grinning. "Welcome to the Grand Canyon, Christa. This is a great river. The rapids start out easy and get harder so you can learn as you go along." "Harder?" The days and nights of my first motor trip as a passenger have extended into a colorful blur. But I have one clear memory from that trip, of the incident that changed my life. We had reached the Little Colorado, where the water was backed up to form a vivid turquoise swimming pool into which we fell delighted to play for hours. A small orange raft bearing 4 passengers and a tan, muscular boatwoman came down the Little Colorado towards us as we were playing. We stopped to watch. They all waved and then headed out onto the green Colorado. The boatwoman looked so competent, so healthy, so right. I remember thinking, I want to belong here like that woman. After the motor trip, I went straight back to California and applied for rowing positions. I joined up with a small company in Oregon that offered a 4-day training trip on the Rogue River. Throughout the trip, people talked about which rivers to run, and I would say, "I want to run the Grand Canyon." There are lots harder rivers," people countered. That's okay, I would think. I just want to run the Grand Canyon. I couldn't really explain why. I was hired as a guide on the Rogue, the Deschutes, and the Upper and Lower Klamath. I spent the summer learning the difference between a hole and a lateral wave, how to ferry upstream to slow down and get across the current, how to tuck behind rocks. When I applied for positions rowing baggage boats on the Colorado, I was pretty sure I could handle it. I could not have been more mistaken. My first boat was a slug, with a low bow and a low stern, apparently designed to scoop in water as you went through the smallest waves. I was used to 14-foot boats loaded for 4 days. This 18-foot raft was loaded for 13 days. I was used to 8-foot matchstick oars. These were 11-foot telephone poles. I was used to slow-moving water that allowed you time to maneuver and correct errors. This fast, powerful water allowed no room for mistakes. And worst of all, I had rowed only with pinned oars where the oar blade is held permanently at right angles to the water. This boat had open oarlocks and the oars could rotate at free will. 3 rapids into the trip at House Rock, I discovered the frustration of open oarlocks. I needed to make a move new for me, a downstream ferry in which one uses the river's flow to help move across the current. It's particularly critical at House Rock because if you follow the current, you end up in a boat eater of a hole, big recirculating wave. I was poised, ready to take that first powerful stroke. Unbeknownst to me, my oar blade had turned parallel to the water, and as I pulled back with all my might, the oar sliced cleanly through the river, and I almost flew backwards off my seat before I regained control. By that time, of course, it was too late. The move had been missed, and we ended up squarely in the hole. I was learning quickly. I never did flip on that first rowing trip. I'm not sure why. I certainly should have, given some of my runs. Mr. Toad's wild ride, oars gone, feet in the air, backwards, sideways, hitting rocks, completely out of control. At Horn Creek, notoriously difficult in low water, I missed the right move and went backwards straight into the jaws of the beast, hit the rock wall sideways, almost flipped, broke a spare oar, and washed my trainer right out of the boat. As he climbed, sputtering, into the back of the boat, he struck me as looking a little weary. No wonder. 3 years earlier, on the motor trip, I'd met a fellow passenger, an artist, who talked about what he saw in the canyon walls. He was taking pictures all the way down the river, not of vistas or ruins or waterfalls, but of textures and shadows and shapes. When he got these home, he said, he would paint them. Looking at the place in this new light, I began to see that the canyon offers much more than just rapids and beautiful side canyons. I would watch Jim sitting quietly beside a wall, examining it, and go find my own wall or pile of stones to examine. It's easy to see the canyon for its obvious grandness. I was learning to see the subtleties. Slowly, the unfamiliar rocks transcended the boundaries of names. Kaibab, Coconino, Supai, and Tapeats entered my mind as textures and colors and shapes, not just geological formations. I began to notice the way the sunlight moved down the wall in a widening golden band in the morning and back up again in the afternoon until it was just a narrow bronze sliver at the top. I saw how the calm water looked like polished steel in the early morning and how the rapids looked like a million white horses galloping if you watched them for a while. But at the oars of my own boat for the first time, I wasn't looking around. All the geology I had learned departed my head to make space for anxiety. My world became a narrow path of water. Then one morning, after we'd come through a series of rapids and the water would be calm for a while, I woke up before sunrise, relaxed for the first time in days. I lay on my boat and listened to the water gurgling by as I watched the sky lighten by degrees. A canyon wren trilled its descending call, and one of the passengers chuckled softly. I looked up at the walls, which had felt confining just the day before. Suddenly, they felt like arms, welcoming me home. The afternoon before, when I had come through one rapid in good style, with a smile on my face, David slapped me on the back and said, "That's what you're here for." Now, as I lay watching dawn come to the canyon, I thought, now, this is what I'm here for. Something had changed. I felt like I belonged. Still, Lava Falls was ahead. Most of the way downriver, I had been worrying about the falls. I remember them from my first trip as a passenger. That time, our boatman had thought it wisest to take the safer path down the left side, and I barely got wet. To tell you the truth, I'd been disappointed, as I now understand passengers often are if they don't get the big ride. But we had watched the third boat of our party run down the right. Their 33-foot boat hit the second wave and almost disappeared. Then they hit the big wave at the bottom and completely disappeared. All I could see was the baseball cap of the guide standing in the motor well. When they emerged from the bottom and motored over to join us, the people on the boat were drenched and ecstatic. For the first time, I had understood the euphoria and the camaraderie that comes with a successful run through a big rapid. Now, I was getting ready to row my own boat through Lava Falls. We stood on the scout rock above the rapid, and what I saw I could only describe as chaos. The only thing I could pick out of the mess was a huge waterfall called the Ledge. It looked like most of the river's flow went into its yawning, cavernous hole. That thing could swallow a Greyhound bus without a belch, and I knew if someone went in, their boat would stay stuck for a long, long time. The boatman explained the run to me, and we started back to the boats. I felt sick. Then Ed turned around and yelled, "Hey, just watch out at the top, 'cause the river's going to do something you don't expect, okay?" What? What was the river going to do? But he was off on his own boat, getting ready. We pulled out into that slow, interminably slow current. Dave was in front, ready to be weighed if needed. We were sideways to the current so that I could adjust my positioning before turning straight downstream. Somewhere out there to the left was the ledge hole, the one place in the entire rapid I knew I did not want to go. In front of me, the world dropped off into noise. Suddenly, the current began to sweep left. Fast. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I did not want to go into that hole sideways, so I spun the stern downstream and pulled hard. I entered the rapid dead backwards. When we reached the bottom, brimful of water and oarless, Dave screamed, "What was that? Don't ever do that again." I was scared and shaking, but steadfastly maintained that I had done the right thing to avoid getting into the ledge sideways. Turns out we weren't nowhere near it. The current always sweeps a little left just before going back to the right. You just have to wait it out. I still think Ed could have explained it a little better to me. As we had approached the end of our motor trip that first time on the river, my friends were excitedly discussing the upcoming helicopter flight and the hot shower waiting at the rim. But all I could think about was that I was leaving. My eyes had opened to a place and a life that I never could have invented in my wildest fantasies. I had slept under a sky that defied imagination and watched lightning bolts shatter the gray clouds during a summer thunderstorm. I had learned more geology in 6 days than in any semester in a classroom. And the river had flowed through all of this like a binding thread, an ever-present teacher. My only thoughts were of returning, and I could not stop crying. 2 ravens had danced overhead, calling, as if to tell me to come back. When we reached Diamond Creek early on the 13th morning of my first rowing trip, I could see the place was scarred by years of de-rigging and takeout vehicles. It contrasted sharply to the nearly pristine beaches we had slept on for the past 12 nights. Looking at it, I started to cry. We pulled in, and I began to take apart my boat, still crying. That same feeling I had had 3 years before swept over me. I didn't want to leave. The other boatmen stared at me curiously. Too much stress, they reasoned. I heard a raucous cry from overhead and looked up to see 2 ravens circling, reminding me that they'd be here when I returned. I smiled and walked toward the truck. Behind me, the river flowed on around a bend, out of sight. 8 years later, as I write these memories, they are as clear to me as yesterday, although much has changed. I now lead trips. I realize that boatmen are not mythical heroes, as I once thought, but I am prouder to belong to this group than of any other thing in my life. The woman who inspired me at the Little Colorado River is now a friend. I told her of the role she had in bringing me to the canyon. The whitewater still makes my heart quicken, but I now recognize landmarks in the rapids. They're no longer chaos to me. I usually hang on to my oars, and I've learned how to control my boat. Most of the time. I can relax enough to think of natural history and stories, poetry and art, and talk with people about them as we drift downstream. But the river and her canyons still inspire me. They still teach and humble me. I watch the guests on our trips go through all the same phases that I experienced, from anxiety and fear to acceptance and wonder. And I realize that a cycle is born with each new trip, with each new journey. You just naturally go through it, and there's no turning back. So I hope that all of you get on the river really soon. Any river, even if it's not Grand Canyon. Any river is a wonderful thing. And I hope that you fight for rivers, free-flowing rivers, and you fight to protect them, and you learn to love them like I have. And I hope that I will see you someday on a river. Have a wonderful summer, and stay safe and be careful. Bye.